My uncle didn't wait until the will was read. He didn't wait until the lawyer spoke. He didn't even wait until the funeral food was cleared away. He leaned in close to me, breath smelling like coffee and entitlement, and said quietly, "Your grandfather promised me the house. Not might have. Not talked about. Promised. Like it was already settled. Like I was just a technical inconvenience standing in the way." We were still standing in the living room of Grandpa's house. The same living room where he used to sit every morning with the paper folded just so. The same couch where he'd taken his last nap. People moved around us, voices low, polite grief playing out in rehearsed tones. My Uncle Richard smiled when he said it. That's what chilled me. "You understand," he added, placing a hand on my shoulder like we were allies. "It was always meant to stay in the family." I looked at his hand, then at his face, then around the room. My cousins avoided my eyes. My aunt busied herself stacking plates. Someone laughed awkwardly near the kitchen, like laughter could soften anything. I stepped away from him gently. "I haven't seen the will yet," I said. Richard chuckled. "You won't need to. Your grandpa and I talked about this for years." Years. That word carried weight when he said it. What he didn't mention, what he couldn't know, was that I had talked to Grandpa too. Just not loudly. Not performatively. Not with witnesses. I nodded. "We'll see." That annoyed him. I could tell because his smile thinned. His eyes sharpened. "You don't need to make this difficult," he said. "I've already started making plans." There it was. Ownership. I excused myself and walked into the hallway where Grandpa's old coat still hung on the hook. I touched the sleeve lightly, grounding myself. Because here's the thing everyone assumed about me. That I was too quiet to challenge anything. Too polite to push back. Too grateful to question. They thought my presence was ceremonial. They were wrong. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following week. Richard spent that entire time telling anyone who would listen how Grandpa had wanted him to have the house. How he'd earned it. How he'd been there. He said it so often it started sounding like truth. But Grandpa had taught me something long before any paperwork existed. People who talk the loudest about what they're owed are usually afraid of what's written down. And what was written down was about to rewrite everything. The days between the funeral and the will reading felt heavier than the funeral itself. Grief had rules. Paperwork didn't. People returned casseroles. Thank you cards piled up. Neighbors stopped asking how we were and started asking questions instead. "Any word on the house? Richard's probably taking that on, right? Such a blessing to keep it in the family." Every sentence assumed the same ending. Richard made sure of that. He called twice. Stopped by once. Spoke like a man already packing boxes. "I'll probably repaint," he said casually one afternoon, leaning against Grandpa's old doorway. "Make it brighter. Less dated." I stared at him. Grandpa had repainted that house himself the summer before he died. Took him 3 weeks because his hands shook too much to rush. "Did he tell you that?" I asked. Richard waved his hand. Details. Details. That was how he described someone else's life. He talked about the house the way he talked about investments. Numbers, upgrades, potential resale value. Never memories. Never mornings. Never the creak in the hallway Grandpa refused to fix because he liked knowing where he was in the dark. "You were busy with your own life," Richard added, like it was a kindness. I was the one who handled things. I didn't argue. Arguing would have meant accepting his version of events as the starting point. Instead, I listened. Because while Richard was busy narrating a history that favored him, I was remembering the real one. I remembered who drove Grandpa to his appointments when Richard was too slammed. Who filled his pill organizer every Sunday. Who sat at the kitchen table while Grandpa told the same story for the 3rd time, because hearing it again mattered to him. It wasn't Richard. It had never been. The night before the will reading, I went to the house alone. The lawyer had given me permission. Take what you need emotionally, she said. We'll handle the legal part tomorrow. I walked through the rooms slowly. The house smelled the same. Lemon cleaner and old wood. Familiar and grounding. In the study, Grandpa's desk was exactly as he'd left it. Papers stacked neatly. Pen aligned at a perfect angle. He was meticulous that way. In the bottom drawer, under old tax returns and warranty manuals, I found the folder. Thick. Labeled. Unmistakable. Property documents. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Because Grandpa had shown it to me once, years ago, without drama or build-up. People say things, he'd told me then, tapping the folder. Paper is what tells the truth. That night, I slept on the couch. Not out of sentimentality. Out of clarity. The next morning, the lawyer's office felt too small for the confidence Richard brought into it. He shook hands. Smiled broadly. Sat close to the desk like proximity mattered. My cousins avoided my eyes. My aunt stared at her purse. I took my seat quietly. The lawyer began. Personal effects. Savings. Vehicles. Richard nodded along, relaxed. Then the house. The lawyer adjusted her glasses. The property located at. Richard leaned forward. Has been deeded, she continued, to my client. She said my name. Out loud. Clearly. Final. The room froze. Richard laughed reflexively. No, you mean. I don't, the lawyer said calmly. She slid the document forward. The deed. Signed. Recorded. Unambiguous. $610,000 worth of certainty. Richard's smile collapsed. That's impossible, he said. He promised it to me. The lawyer didn't react. Promises, she said gently, are not deeds. I watched something fracture behind Richard's eyes. Not grief. Entitlement. He turned to me sharply. You knew about this. Yes, I said. How long? Long enough. He stood abruptly. This isn't right. The lawyer folded her hands. It is legal. And final. Richard looked around, searching for support. He found none. Because in that moment, everyone realized something uncomfortable. They hadn't misjudged Grandpa. They'd misjudged me. And the house, every inch of it, was never promised. It was chosen. Richard didn't speak to me after the will reading. Not that day. Not the next. He left the lawyer's office without shaking hands, without saying goodbye, like storming out might undo ink. By that evening, the calls started. Not from him. From everyone else. My aunt called first. Her voice was thin, careful. He's very upset. I said nothing. My cousin texted. Did you know about this ahead of time? I didn't reply. Because what they were really asking wasn't did you know? It was why you. That question followed me everywhere for the next week. At the grocery store. At church. In conversations that pretended to be casual but never were. Richard was so sure. He talked about it for years. I guess your grandpa changed his mind. Changed his mind. Like this was impulse. Richard finally called on the fourth day. No greeting. You manipulated him. I leaned back in my chair, phone resting lightly against my ear. That's a serious accusation. You were always there, he snapped. Always listening. Always agreeing. I almost laughed. Being present isn't manipulation, I said. It's effort. He scoffed. Don't act innocent. He favored you. There it was. The word he'd been building toward. Favoritism. As if care were a competition. As if time were a trick. You didn't visit, I said calmly. You stopped calling. I was busy. Yes, I replied. So was I. Silence. You knew he was lonely. he pressed. And you used that. I closed my eyes briefly. I kept him company, I said. That's not a crime. He exhaled hard. You don't need that house. Need. The argument people make when they've already decided ownership should be based on entitlement. You do? I asked. Yes, he snapped. I've got plans. Renovations. A future. So did he, I said quietly. That stopped him. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't accuse. I didn't need to. Because Grandpa's future had included clarity. That night, I returned to the house to begin sorting through personal items. Richard showed up unannounced. He stood in the doorway like he belonged there. This doesn't change anything, he said. Family is family. I kept folding shirts. You can't just take everything, he continued. I'm not, I replied. I'm taking responsibility. He paced. He wouldn't have wanted this kind of division. I looked up. He would have wanted honesty, I said. This division existed long before the deed. He stopped pacing. You think you're better than us now? He asked. I shook my head. I think he trusted me. That was the truth. Not because I asked. Not because I insisted. Because when it mattered, I showed up quietly and consistently. Richard's voice cracked. He promised me. I met his eyes. No, I said gently. He told you what you wanted to hear so you'd stop arguing. His face flushed. You're lying. I'm not, I said. He told me that too. That was the moment Richard realized something he'd never considered. That Grandpa had seen through him. That the house wasn't a reward for presence. It was protection from chaos. He left without another word. I sat down on the stairs, suddenly exhausted. Not from confrontation. From the weight of understanding. This wasn't about favoritism. It was about reliability. And for the first time, I understood the full scope of what Grandpa had entrusted me with. Not just a house. A boundary. Richard didn't argue anymore. He organized. That's what he'd always been good at. Gathering people, shaping narratives, turning discomfort into consensus. It started subtly. My aunt invited me to lunch. Neutral location. Public. Safe. She stirred her tea longer than necessary before speaking. You know your uncle feels humiliated. I waited. He built his expectations around that house, she continued. People are talking. There it was. Not he's hurt. But people are watching. I didn't build those expectations, I said. He did. She sighed. Couldn't you compromise? Maybe sell it to him? Keep peace. Peace. The word people use when they mean surrender. I'm not negotiating someone else's entitlement, I replied. Her lips pressed together. That feels harsh. So did accusing me of manipulation, I said gently. She didn't respond. The next call came from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. I get that it's legally yours, he said quickly, like he was reading from a script. But morally, I cut him off. Morality isn't determined by volume. He laughed nervously. I'm just saying, Grandpa talked to Richard a lot. So did I replied. He just didn't announce it. Silence. Then the group texts started. Family threads that had been dormant for years suddenly buzzed with activity. Memories selectively shared. Stories reframed. Little comments like paper cuts. Richard always helped with the house. He knew the systems. He was like a son. I didn't respond. Because the louder they got, the clearer something became. This wasn't about honoring Grandpa. It was about correcting embarrassment. Richard couldn't stand that he'd told everyone the house was his, only to be publicly contradicted by a legal document. So he did what insecure people do. He tried to make me the villain. One afternoon, I found a handwritten note taped to the front door of the house. We should talk. This isn't over. No name. No signature. Just pressure. I removed it and went inside. That night, Richard showed up again. This time, he didn't knock. "You're tearing the family apart," he said, standing in the living room like an accusation. I didn't raise my voice. "You did that when you claimed something that wasn't yours. You could fix this," he insisted. "Sell it to me. Cheap. Everyone moves on. Cheap. $610,000 reduced to a social convenience." "I won't," I said. He laughed bitterly. "You think Grandpa would want you living here alone?" "Yes," I replied. "Because he planned it." That stopped him. I walked to the study and pulled open the desk drawer. The folder was still there. I set it on the table between us and opened it. Not the deed. The letter. His letter. "I wasn't supposed to show this," I said. "But you're not listening." Richard scoffed. "I don't need. I read anyway. Not everything. Just enough. I'm leaving the house to the person who treats it like a home, not a prize." Richard's face went pale. Promises made to avoid arguments aren't promises kept. He took a step back. "You knew," he whispered. "Yes," I said. "And I still didn't ask for it." He stared at the paper like it might accuse him. "I was there," he said weakly. "You visited," I corrected. "There's a difference." The room felt smaller after that. Richard didn't threaten me again. He didn't apologize either. But the campaign stopped. Because once truth is introduced, documented, witnessed, undeniable, manipulation loses oxygen. I closed the folder and placed it back in the drawer. The house creaked softly around us, settling. It sounded relieved. I thought it was over. That was my mistake. The pressure campaign stopped, yes, but Richard wasn't the type to accept a loss quietly. He was the type who believed persistence eventually rewrote reality. 2 weeks passed. Then I came home one afternoon and found a truck in the driveway. Not mine. Richard's. The front door was open. I stood there for a moment, keys still in my hand, heart steady in a way that surprised me. I didn't rush. Didn't shout. I stepped inside slowly. He was in the living room, measuring tape in hand. The nerve of it almost impressed me. "What are you doing?" I asked. He jumped, then straightened like he'd been caught mid-argument instead of mid-trespass. "I told you," he said too quickly. "This isn't settled." "It is," I replied. "And you're in my house without permission." He scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. I'm just checking dimensions. If we're going to sell, we should know what we're dealing with." "We." That word again. "I'm not selling," I said. He shook his head, irritated. "You're being stubborn." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being clear." He stepped closer. "You think you can just lock everyone out? This house belongs to the family." "It belongs to me," I corrected. "Legally." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see." That was the first time he said it. Not "we'll talk." Not "we'll figure this out." "We'll see." I didn't argue. I walked into the kitchen and picked up my phone. "Who are you calling?" he asked sharply. "The police," I replied. His smile vanished. "You wouldn't." "I already am." He reached for my arm. That was his second mistake. I stepped back. "Do not touch me." He froze. Something shifted then. Not in him, in me. I realized I wasn't afraid. Annoyed. Disappointed. But not afraid. He raised his hands. "This is ridiculous. You're overreacting." "No," I said. "You're trespassing." I gave the address. My name. Explained the situation clearly. Richard stood there, breathing hard, like a man who couldn't believe a door had finally closed. When the officers arrived, he tried charm. Family misunderstanding. Emotions running high. Just trying to help. They listened. nodded, then asked whose name was on the deed. I handed it over. They turned to Richard. "Sir, you'll need to leave." He stared at them, stunned. "This is my father's house." "It was," one officer replied. "Now it's hers." That word. Hers. Richard looked at me like he'd never seen me before. As he walked past, he leaned in close. "You didn't have to do this." I met his eyes. "Neither did you." The door closed behind him. That night, I changed the locks. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. Because when people believe something was promised to them, they don't always stop when the truth contradicts them. They escalate. But I wasn't escalating. I was anchoring. For the first time since Grandpa died, I slept upstairs in his old bedroom. The mattress still firm. The air still familiar. And as the house settled around me, I understood something that had taken years to learn. Ownership isn't just about paperwork. It's about the moment you stop asking permission to protect what's yours. Richard didn't come back. Not in person. Instead, he tried something quieter. More dangerous. The letter arrived 3 days after the police incident. Thick envelope. Legal letterhead. His name typed neatly in the corner like it belonged there. Intent to contest ownership. I read it once. Then again. He was claiming undue influence. Suggesting Grandpa hadn't been of sound mind. Hinting that I'd isolated him. Manipulated him. Every sentence was carefully worded. Vague. Accusatory without being specific. I didn't panic. Because Grandpa had planned for this too. I called the lawyer. She listened without interrupting, then sighed softly. Not worried. Annoyed. "He's bluffing," she said. "But we'll shut it down properly." She asked me to bring everything. Letters. Texts. Appointment records. Witness names. I brought more than she expected. Because Grandpa hadn't just prepared a deed. He'd prepared evidence. Doctor's notes confirming capacity. Video recordings he'd insisted on, just in case. A notarized letter explaining exactly why he chose me. Not emotional. Methodical. It was the most Grandpa thing he could have done. When Richard's lawyer received our response, the tone changed immediately. No more threats. No more accusations. Just silence. Then came the voicemail. "This has gone too far," Richard said. His voice sounded strained. "We can still fix this." Fix. Like the truth was broken. I didn't call back. The next attempt came through my aunt. "He's embarrassed," she said. "He feels cornered." I pictured Richard, finally realizing that confidence without proof collapses quickly. "He cornered himself," I replied. 2 weeks later, the formal withdrawal arrived. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just legal surrender. Richard had lost. Not just the house. The illusion that he could outtalk documentation. The family shifted after that. Not dramatically. Subtly. People stopped pushing. Stopped asking. Stopped pretending there were 2 sides. Because once lawyers get involved and one side disappears, the truth tends to settle. I began renovations, but not the kind Richard imagined. No open concept nonsense. No flipping. I fixed what was broken. The loose stair. The leaky window. The fence Grandpa always said he'd get to next spring. Each repair felt like an act of closure. One afternoon, while sorting through the garage, I found a small box labeled, "Just in case." Inside were copies. More copies. Of everything. Grandpa had anticipated disbelief. And neutralized it. That night, I sat on the porch and watched the sun go down behind the trees he'd planted himself. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. Because the house wasn't a prize. It was a decision Grandpa had made carefully, consciously, and without regret. Richard had tried to rewrite history. The problem was, history had receipts. When everything finally went quiet, it felt strange. No more calls. No more, just checking in, messages. No more subtle pressure dressed up as concern. The silence wasn't empty. It was earned. I moved fully into the house that spring. Not all at once, room by room. I took my time the way Grandpa always did. I didn't rush to replace things just because I could. I learned the house again. How the morning light hit the kitchen counter at an angle that made dust visible. How the back door stuck unless you lifted it just right. How the floorboard near the stairs creaked no matter how many times you tried to fix it. Richard would have called those flaws. Grandpa had called them character. Neighbors stopped me on walks. Some congratulated me. Some asked careful questions, as if the house itself were listening. Glad it stayed with someone who cares, one woman said quietly. I nodded. I never corrected anyone. Never defended myself. I didn't need to. Because the truth was built into the walls. Months later, I ran into Richard at the grocery store. It was accidental. Unavoidable. He looked smaller somehow. Less certain. Like someone who'd spent too long arguing with reality and lost. We exchanged polite nods. Nothing more. That was the end of it. No confrontation. No closure speech. Just distance. And distance, I learned, is sometimes the healthiest ending. On the anniversary of Grandpa's death, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and read his letter again. The paper was creased now. Soft from handling. One line stood out more than it had before. Don't let loud people rush you into doubting quiet truth. I finally understood what he meant. Richard had been loud. Persistent. Confident. But confidence without consent is just noise. The deed hadn't just given me a house. It had given me permission to trust what I knew, to stand firm without shouting, to let documentation speak when words failed. Sometimes people don't lose because they were wrong. They lose because they assumed no one would challenge them. Richard assumed I'd fold. Assumed politeness meant weakness. Assumed promises mattered more than proof. He was wrong. I planted a garden that summer. Nothing elaborate. Just tomatoes, herbs, a few flowers Grandpa used to like. The soil was stubborn. I had to work it slowly. That felt right. Because this house, this inheritance, was never about winning. It was about stewardship. And every quiet morning I wake up here, every repair I make, every choice I take my time with, feels like honoring the only promise that ever mattered. The one Grandpa put in writing. The one that said, without a single raised voice, "This is yours." Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.